This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In our national program of talks tonight, we bring you an interview entitled Swati Tirunal, The Flame of Renaissance, in which Dr. R.P. Raja, author and historian, is in conversation with Srimati S. Uma Maheshwari, author and a research scholar of Travancore history.
We welcome our special guest for today's program. We have with us Dr. R.P. Raja, a physician turned historian. He has contributed extensively to the history of Travancore. New light on Swati Tirunal, Iraiman Thambi, and the recently released Swati Tirunal Trails from History are a few of his monumental works. His determination to collect and evaluate information gathered from primary sources makes his works a reference guide for students and research scholars. We will get some deeper insights on Maharaja Swati Thirunal from our expert guest, Dr. R.P. Raja. Good evening, sir, and welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. I think it's a great privilege for me to talk a few words on the great Maharaja of Travancore.
Let us begin with the unusual situations that prevailed in Travancore during the birth of Maharaja Swati Thirunal.
He was born under very special circumstances because following the demise of Maharaja Balarama Varma, the royal family was left with 3 girls only. So there were no male members to rule the country, and the people became afraid that the British government may annex the state to the Madras presidency. But God was very kind, and so Rani Gavilakshmi gave birth to a prince on the 16th of April 1813, and he is Swati Tirunal. In Travancore, normally the names repeat itself, and for the purpose of identification, births are attached to the names. So we are having Swati Tirunaḻ Rama Varma or Revi Tirunal Revi Varma, and so on. So similarly, Swati is a nakshatra, is an asterism attached to the name for the purpose of identification.
Could you please narrate his childhood days? What was it like?
When you think of the childhood of the Maharaja, certain things come to the mind. We'll have to remember that Martanda Varma, the maker of modern Travancore, has surrendered the kingdom of Travancore to Sri Vrindavan Swami. So when we say Travancore state, it does not belong to any human beings. It belongs to Sri Vrindavan Swami, the God himself. And so naturally, the Maharajas are only who carry on the administration of Sri Vrindavan Swami's state. So for that purpose, the Maharajas are made Sri Vrindavan Dasas, servants of Sri Vrindavan, by a religious ritual. And that is conducted normally at the age of 1. The baby is taken to the Sri Vrindavan Swami temple, and then he is laid on the single stone platform in front of the Sanctum Sanctorum. And following certain rituals, he is proclaimed as the Sri Vrindavan Dasa, servant of Sri Vrindavan Swami. And so every Maharaja is ruling Travancore as a servant of Sri Vrindavan Swami for ruling his kingdom. Whose kingdom? The Sri Vrindavan Swami's kingdom. So that forms the most important event in the life of Swati Tirunal during his early childhood. And after that, of course, normally he had the privilege of having exceptionally good education during his childhood, which was not to such an extent in other princely states in India. So he had the advantage of very good teachers, and then he was exposed to English with modern education also. He had a flair for knowledge. And so by the time he was 16 years of age, he has mastered Sanskrit, Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, Hindustani, Marathi. 7 Indian languages he has mastered by the age of 7. And he also mastered Persian. In 1843, we came across a record which showed that he knew Arabic also. So he knew 7 Indian languages and 3 foreign languages. And not only that, he also had a flair for studying. So even though his formal education was over by 16 years of age, he continued his studies with the result that he mastered our ancient Dharmashastras, Vedopanishads and other things, and also foreign works on modern medicine, astronomy, science, etc. Not only a king, but a very, very brilliant scholar also. He could converse with anybody very easily and fluently.
We know that Maharaja Swati Thirunal was a great composer. What are his contributions to music?
Actually, we know the Maharaja in many circles as Music Maharaja. And nobody thinks about his political career or anything, because he is more popular now as a Music Maharaja. And we know that we have got about more than 400 compositions to his credit. And they are spread in what you call different forms of musical forms called the kirtanas, padas, javalis, and also Hindustani forms like the dhumri, hori, khayal, etc. Not only that, it's also in different languages. Sanskrit is there, Malayalam is there. Originally it was called Manipuravalam, but actually it's Malayalam. And then we are having Hindustani compositions, then Carnatic compositions. So there's what you call an unusual variety of compositions from an individual who could have composed not only about 400 compositions, but these 400 compositions are come in 105 ragas, in different ragas and in different languages. I think it's one of the most exceptional, what you call, contribution of the Maharaja for Indian classical music. In fact, Prince Tirunaḻ Rama Varma had compared Swanal to Mozart, the great Western composer. Mozart also composed songs in different forms like concertos, quintets, symphonies, etc. Similarly, Swanal also had composed music in different forms like the padams. And then he had also compared, because Mozart died after the age of 33 and Maharaja Swanal also passed away after 33. So the comparison between Mozart and Swanal are very, very similar, very close.
And we have literary compositions too, besides.
And of course, normally we don't remember what is literary compositions much, because all these literary compositions are in Sanskrit. Actually, in Kerala at one point of time, Sanskrit formed the primary language. In all our families, we never learned Malayalam at all. We learned Sanskrit. We learned the Malayalam alphabets. And once you learn Sanskrit, you are automatically a Malayalam Pandit also. So that was the situation. At that point of time, all his great contributions like the Bhakti having about 1,000 verses, then of course Yanandavara Varnana Parabandham, which forms a historical account of the Thiruvananthapuram temple, then Palnava Chatakam, about 100 slokas praising the glory of the Lord. Then we are having the Vakyanas, the Ajamala Vakyanam, Kujalu Vakyanam. And then more than that, a very special work is this Mahana Prasandhya Prasa Vyavastha, wherein he has given how music should be composed and where alliteration should be used when the compositions are in Sanskrit. That is what we call a technical work. And then he has given introduction to the 100 slokas of Nilanda Dikshithar's Anyavadesi Chataka. And Ullur claims that he has written a Atakatha called Yayadi Charitam, but that of course needs a little more clarification. So these contributions are not known much. His literary contributions have now faded into a little bit of oblivion, because Sanskrit is not a very current language among the elite now. In olden days, scholarly circles always dealt with Sanskrit. Now it is not there. So he has got both musical as well as literary compositions to his credit.
So from your works, we came to know that Maharaja Swati Thirunal has codified music for Sri Padmanabha Swami Temple as well as Navaratri celebrations.
When we study the musical compositions, we will find that all his compositions are devotional songs to Sri Padmanabha Swami. And so from morning to evening on regular days, he fixed up the compositions, the ragas. All these compositions were what you call written by him, so that all the songs which we now find in Sri Padmanabha Temple are all only the compositions of the Maharaja. And he also has written compositions for special occasions like the Ulsavas and for the various Shivelis, which raga should be sung, which kirtana should be sung. So all these things had been meticulously studied by him and meticulously implemented by him also. And not only that, under certain circumstances, the musicians are rendering the music in a special way, even walking backward during the Shiveli time.
Yes, on the Thiruvanam day we have the Mangalavadhyam.
Mangalavadhyam.
Yes.
So actually, there was both a visual as well as an audial component also for the songs established in the Sri Padmanabha temple. Then coming to Navaratri, Navaratri festivals were always conducted in the Varnavaram Palace originally. It is a purely royal family festival. People have a wrong notion that it is a part of Sri Padmanabha temple festival. No, it is not. It is purely a royal family personal festival. It is conducted always at a place where the Maharajas are at that point of time on Navaratri. Supposing the Maharaja is in Mavirikira, then the festival will be in Mavirikira. Supposing the Maharaja is in Attingal, then the festival will be in the Attingal. And if he is in Trivandrum, it will be in Trivandrum. But in 1015, that is in 1839, Maharaja Swati Thirunal permanently fixed the Navaratri festival in Trivandrum. Till that time, when you go to the time of Martanda Varma, Balaja, all those people, while they were traveling, even Dharmaraja also, when they are traveling, wherever they were at the point of Navaratri time, the festival was conducted there. But during Maharaja's time, it was fixed in Trivandrum for many reasons. Because the Navaratri festival during his time grew to such a large function with so many people, so many artists coming in, that it cannot be contained by a Parnavaram or a Mahalikara. So only Trivandrum could do that. And all the compositions for the Navaratri function were also his compositions. The only thing is, on very meticulous study, we find that there could be at least a certain, say, especially the Bhagavati composition. His sister also, who was also a very eminent composer.
Rukmini
But unfortunately, her early death prevented her from becoming a well-known Kai of Southern classical music. Probably she also would have been equally great as Maharaja Swati Thirunal as a Vagegari had she been blessed with a longer life. But she had a very tough, painful life, and so she was not able to give, even though her compositions are there, beautiful compositions. So she also could have, regarding the Article Bhagavati, being the Paradevata of the Article Ranis, there could have been a small contribution, but primarily Maharajas.
And your recent work substantiate that he was a great patron of education, science, architecture, agriculture, and he has a collection of Minagri too. Could you please elaborate on it?
I may probably be allowed to go a little back, because you see, the background from which persons come do play a very important part in their actions. In 1817, the then Maharani Regent Gauri Parvati Pai, who was looking after Maharaja Swati Thirunal, who was only a minor, proclaimed, probably for the first time in the world history also, education shall be a state subject. And it is the responsibility of the Travancore state to see that every citizen is educated. This was done in 1817. So the royal family always had given very great importance for the education of the people, irrespective of caste, creed or anything. And that could have been one of the most important inspirations for him also. So he was also very, very keen on educating his public. Then the difference is that he realized that modern education is a must. So he introduced English language first time in Kerala through schools, government schools. He established the first English school, and then it was followed by schools in the various districts also. The credit of introducing modern education to the people of Travancore is for the Maharaja of Travancore.
What about his contributions to science and architecture?
Of course, science, even though it did not form a subject of study in those times, because of his exposure to mathematics, science also, because his teacher himself was a student of a very eminent scientist called Elias Schwartz in Chennai. So Subra was able to make the Maharaja aware that there is a new subject which is coming from the West called modern science. And so the Maharaja took a very keen interest. And it is his interest in modern science which was responsible for, one is the establishment of the observatory here. I mean, it was the second observatory in India at that point of time. Not only that, the British records that the observations of the Trivandrum Observatory are as equal and good as any observatories made by the Western observatories. Then, of course, the Western medicine again. In those days, there were not much doctors and all those things. But during his time, the first lying in hospital was, there was a very crude hospital at Thaikad during the times of the Ranis. But it was not on what you call a scientific lines. A true scientific lines hospital under the government in Kerala came only in 1843 when Maharaja Swati Thirunal established the Thaikad Government Hospital at Trivandrum. So actually the credit of that also goes to him. Then an engineering department, because irrigation in the Nanjanad area was a very important, improving the agriculture of the place, also improving the condition of the people also. So he had Lieutenant Horsley to begin with, and then he was appointed as a superintendent of the engineering department. So an engineering department was started by Maharaja Swati Thirunal. Then communication was a big problem in Travancore in those days. So whenever the government wanted to have a communication on a large scale, they had to go to Kottayam CMS press for the printing. So he established a new printing press in Trivandrum. Architecturally, the Kuduramaliga, then many other structures also. He has built beautiful palaces also. He introduced the modern, and Horsley was one of the main architects for that.
I think his private collections of animals.
There was nothing that he was not interested to. He was interested in everything. I mean, Shangandiman, the historian, says that at one point Trivandrum had human beings from all over the world. So they had people from Africa, they had Chinese people, they had people from Thailand and other areas also. Europeans were there. So there were different groups of people also were brought for the Maharaja to see them. And there were 2 Chinese people who were also accommodated in the palace itself for him to see how they ate food with 2 sticks. So he was a man of great curiosity and a thirst for learning also. So he had a menagerie. So he had collections of birds, foxes, leopards, and all those things. And that, of course, in course of time became the modern zoo in Trivandrum.
And the Maharaja's reign witnessed many wholesome improvements in the social life of his subjects.
True.
Kindly enlighten on his far-reaching reforms.
It can be seen in two ways. One is that he had always encouraged libraries. So in that way, the people become exposed, you see, more and more to modern knowledge. And that, of course, will pave the way for a modern way of life also, more polished way of life. Then he was always against the very primitive, old, crude practices, whatever might have been the explanation given for such actions. He never compromised with that. So what he did was, he had a very eminent people brought from Malabar, and he made them write down a code of laws, which became famous as the Regulations of Travancore. It was a Pakka code of laws in modern lines, and for implementing it, he established courts also all over the state. As a result of that, the civil and criminal cases were handled in a more modern way. Then, of course, there were primitive practices even during his time. Say, for example, people were asked to dip their hands in boiling ghee to prove their innocence. He said, it's all nonsense. How can you prove? It's a very cruel act. So he abolished it. In fact, in later years, in Vidya Vinodini, a publication from a Cochin area, Kodungalur Kunakudambra and the great Kerala Vyasan has written that Swadhanal has done a wrong thing by abolishing ghee ordeal. So you can see the mind of the people. So even though there were protests, he never bothered about that. He went ahead and stopped it. Then there was the practice of what you call shaming the people suspected of adultery, especially in the Kanyakumari district of today's Tamil Nadu. The heads were shaved and they were to walk on the streets half naked, and people will be jeering at her, throwing stones and all those things. The Maharaja with a very firm hand put a stop to it. And all such complaints should be brought to the proper courts and dealt with. So rudiments of social reform, those started during the Gauri Parvati by his time, grew up during the Maharaja's time.
Naturally, the Maharaja, a multifaceted personality, had a very colorful royal court, is it not?
Being a very scholarly person, very talented musician and musicologist, his fame spread all over India, and people from various walks of life started to come and throng his court. So there were great musicians from not only South India but also from North India. Scholars from different places like Kumbakonam and Benares, even such remote places, people used to come here. Ranjit Singh had sent a great Shankarnath Jolsher. He came all the way from Lahore, hearing the fame of the Maharaja. And we had Shatkala Gondamalar was there, Palakkad Parameshwara Father was there, Meru Goswami was there. Hiremantambi, of course, is a local person. But people who came from outside, Kannaya Bharma, who is a direct disciple of Dada Swamigal. Then we had Tanjavur Nalvar, the great Nattavas, Panaya, Chinnaya, Shivanandavan Vadivelu. Panaya's Varnams are very considered to be most graceful Varnas in South India even now. And Vadivelu introduced violin in Travancore court. Similarly, people of different categories also came to the court. Scholarly discourses were there. And so his court was always thronged with people, and it was so lively. Then one of the most important points is that the Maharaja had a passion for dance also. He liked the Indian forms of dance very much. So one peculiarity of his compositions is that they are all for audiovisual purposes. There is a general opinion in music circles. The Maharaja's music is basically simple in their compositions. But what they have not realized is that he had made his compositions with an audiovisual mind. Now, supposing we are going to have abstract concepts in a music composition, a dancer will not be able to express an abstract, say for example, thou art that. It will be very difficult for a dancer to express that. So all his compositions are done in such a way that they can be expressed through dance forms also. So that was a very, very important point of his musical compositions. They are all for primarily audiovisual purposes also, not only for hearing but also seeing through dance forms. As Venkata Subramanian used to say that you can hear rhythms, dance rhythms in the music of Maharaja Swati Thirunal. So many dancers like Sundar Lakshmi, Sundar Parvati, all those great dancers also came and adorned the court of Maharaja Swati Thirunal. So the whole Trivandrum was full of what you call different kind of human beings, then different type of people with different forms of accomplishments. So the entire Trivandrum was a different Trivandrum,
It was culturally vibrant.
cultural vibrant, and scholarly also. Great scholars from Kumbakonam and other places used to visit. And the one speciality of the Maharaja is that none of the people who came to his court ever went back disappointed. He respected everyone, he honored every person, and they were all given presents so that they went back from Travancore with joy in their hearts. Nobody was ever disappointed.
Swati Tirunal, he was a genius in more than one sphere of life. How did the Maharaja manage to pack so much into such a short life?
I have divided actually his administration as well as his life into three phases. The first phase is from 1829 to 1840, then from 1840 to 1843, and then from 1843 to 1846. These were the three phases of his life. From 1829 to 1840 was his glorious period. At that time, you see, what he did was, he became the King of Travancore on the 20th of April, 1829. The first thing that he did was, he brought the Huzur office, which you call the Secretariat now, from Koilon to Trivandrum. It was under the control and observation of the British resident. Macaulay brought it to Koilon, but he brought it back to Trivandrum and placed inside the Valiyakottaram Palace complex, so that the Secretariat was a part of the Palace complex. Whenever he wanted, he can walk inside. And then he made arrangements for the different officers to come before him with their reports on particular time and particular dates. So the expedition of government business became very fast. And it was a great help for the people, ordinary people with their grievances. Now we know what is retapism is something which we know now. So in those days, in his days, such a thing was never there because no file was pending in the Secretariat because he attended them personally. So that was a great advantage. And this went on till 1840. But by that time, the transactions of the government business became much larger. And so he handed the general administration to the Diwan. So from 1840 to 1843, the Diwan administered the state, of course, under his supervision. And he attended to only very important items and policy matters. The 1843 to 1846 was a very painful period because of the interference of General Cullen. And so he actually went into introversion. There was a depression also for him. And so then he turned to religious life. And gradually he faded away. And in the early hours of morning of 27th of December 1846, he passed away. But during the 1829 to 1840 period, all the contributions in music came during that particular 11-year period was the glorious period of his life. So even though his whole life was only 33 years, one could say that whatever he had produced in 11 years' time. His life was only 33 years. His productive years were 11 years only. And this 11 years he has contributed 400 musical compositions, very high-level literary compositions. And he has done so much of improvement for the welfare of the state and the people. Social reforms were there. And it is also said that when the Travancore state was existing, people used to say that there was no department in Travancore which either he did not start or modify. So you can imagine the genius of the man.
What were the efforts taken by Maharaja Sri Chitra Tirunal and his mother Maharani Sethu Parvati Bai in popularizing the compositions of Swati Tirunal?
Naturally, we now remember him for his musical compositions. But there was a time around the what you call latter half of the 19th century, these compositions began to be forgotten. That is because unlike the great Trimurtis, who were professional musicians also, and who were a Shishya Parampara to carry on the light which he lit, Maharaja Swati Thirunal, being a ruler, did not have a Shishya Parampara. And so as time passed on, there was nobody to carry on the light which he lit. And so the whole compositions went into an eclipse. Great people like T. Lakshmanpilla in 1907 lamented actually because these compositions are being forgotten, so somebody should come forward and see that these are brought to light again. So it is here that Maharani Sethu Parvati Bai especially, along with of course her son Chitra Tirunal, for taking so many different forms of action to bring to light the Maharaja's compositions. Establishment of the Music Academy, calling musicians from outside like Samagadi, Aryakuda Ramanajayangar, G. N. Balasubramaniam. All of them have done human work. One more thing I would say, at one point of time, Kerala was a dry land for pure music. See, Kerala was a land of music. But in Kerala, we sang what you call, when we rowed a boat, we have got Vanchipata. We sang when girls are given in marriage. We sang when we do something. Even our classical music called the Sopana Sangeetam was only sung in a major temple during the Prasanna Puja. So in Kerala, music was an adventitious art. It never formed a pure art. Whereas in South India and North India, music developed into pure arts. Whereas in Kerala, it is an advantageous one. That created a situation in Kerala wherein pure Carnatic music could not grow very easily. So one of the reasons for Maharaja Swadhinal's compositions were not growing in Kerala was because there were not that situation by which pure music could grow in Kerala at that point of time. It is there where the foreign musicians who came from outside helped us, and that Kerala also started taking up classical music. Of course, even in Swadhinal time, there was a little bit of classical music in Trichur. There were some families who encouraged. In Palakkad also there was some music, but generally in Travancore area it was very, very little. Then of course, established the Music Academy. Then through All India Radio, there was a regular program of Maharaja's music. The role played by All India Radio for popularizing the music of Maharaja Swati, because it is only not books written with the notations, it is actual vocal teaching of music through the radio system. Travancore Radio at that point of time had played a tremendous role in popularizing his music. One has to be very, very thankful to All India Radio, Trivandrum, for conducting the Swadhinal Music Festival every year. On one side, I would rather say we are obliged to do so. On second side, we have to be thankful to the interest, the sincerity, and the pains which they take to make the festival every year a grand function.
And they invariably broadcast the Navaratri Mandapam concerts.
That's a very, very important, very important.
Sir, Renaissance is defined as a renewal of life, vigor, interest, rebirth and revival. Can we say that Maharaja Swati Thirunal lit the flame of Renaissance?
We cannot say that Maharaja Swadhinal lit the flame of Renaissance, because the administrative reforms or the social reforms, he did not revive something which already existed. Actually, he implemented new social reforms and administrative reforms. So I think the flame of Renaissance defines, in this present context, we are remembering his administrative and social reforms. So the Renaissance is about the administrative and social reforms which have gone into a kind of eclipse because of his musical compositions. So here, Swati Tirunal, he is the subject of Renaissance. That I feel is a more appropriate definition. By Swati Tirunal, Flame of Renaissance, I personally feel that we are, the All India Radio, through this program, is actually having a renaissance of Maharaja Swati Tirunal, wherein we are remembering his administrative and social reforms which had gone into an eclipse.
Thank you, Dr. R.P. Raja, for being with us in explaining to us the man born to be a king, whose court had a galaxy of eminent musicians and scholars. Every seed he sowed grew well, and we are enjoying the fruits of his far-sighted reforms. Let the glory of Maharaja Swati Thirunal shine forever and forever through works like this.
Thank you.
In our national program of talks tonight, you were listening to the interview entitled Swati Tirunal, The Flame of Renaissance, in which Dr. R.P. Raja, author and historian, was in conversation with Srimati S. Uma Maheshwari, author and research scholar of Travancore history, with assistance in production by Shirley Jane and Shibu George. This program was produced and presented by N. Sasikumar of AIR Thiruvanthapuram and came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.